Zarzel's vessel slipped through the outer edges of the Sol system, unnoticed by the primitive electromagnetic net surrounding the third planet. He had visited hundreds of worlds, catalogued thousands of species, and classified dozens of intelligent life forms. Earth, however, was an anomaly. Its designation came without much detail, buried beneath warning flags and redacted entries. But one term had stuck out, blaring like a distress beacon: Class 14 Deathworld. He didn't believe it. Deathworld classifications were rare beyond Class 9. Anything above that was considered near uninhabitable, used only for resource extraction by drones or penal colonies. No sentient species had ever emerged from a Class 14 planet. Surely, the registry was wrong. He'd seen what real death worlds looked like: poison atmospheres, crushing gravity, unstable magnetic fields. Earth looked serene. Hovering above the planet's equator, Zarzel's scans returned data inconsistent with a death world of that magnitude. Nitrogen-oxygen atmosphere. Acceptable gravity. A temperature range well within tolerable limits. Liquid water in abundance. Photosynthetic plant life covering most of the surface. He watched flocks of winged creatures pass beneath clouds. Vast forests stretched across continents. A blue-green sphere that appeared, at first glance, almost idyllic. He descended. The atmosphere didn't require filtration, though he kept a secondary mask on standby. Stepping out into what humans call the temperate forest, Zarzel's ocular lenses adjusted for the sunlight. It wasn't too bright, the air was fresh, and the scent of organic decay told him the ecosystem was active. For a moment, he considered the possibility that the registry had simply mislabeled the planet due to some ancient error. Then he noticed the insects. Not just flying nuisances or crawling ground creatures. Swarms. Entire coordinated clouds of winged organisms that responded aggressively to his scent signature. One species released a chemical compound when crushed that burned the sensory pads on his fingers. Another injected a neurotoxin that caused temporary motor disruption. And this was within 5 minutes of walking into the forest. He initiated a bioshield. Further down the slope, he detected larger fauna. One creature, a massive quadruped covered in fur, snarled at him from behind a thicket. He increased magnification. The beast's musculature was dense. Its claws could shred carbon plating. And yet, local records showed humans had domesticated similar animals as pets. Zarzel paused to scan the terrain. The trees were over 20 meters tall. Several released pollen toxic to cerati lungs. The ground was unstable in places, with deceptive moss covering pits of rotting vegetation. Fungi in the area emitted spores that could cause neural disorientation if inhaled. He moved carefully, adjusting his breathing and movement. The planet was beginning to reveal its true nature. Yet life thrived here. Not in isolated colonies or sealed environments, but everywhere. He passed through a clearing where several small primates screamed from treetops, throwing hard seeds at him with shocking accuracy. A venomous snake slithered past his boot, unbothered by his presence. Predators and prey interacted on razor-thin margins. There was no safety net, no slow learning curve. Every species had evolved claws, toxins, speed, deception, or camouflage. It was a crucible of constant, unending conflict. Life was not nurtured here, it clawed its way forward. He reached the edge of a human settlement. From a distance, it looked rudimentary: synthetic structures, ready heat signatures, electromagnetic chatter. But his sensors registered radiation levels that would sterilize most life forms in weeks. Traces of heavy metal contamination in the water supply. Airborne pollutants that compromised lung efficiency. And still, life. Vibrant, chaotic, adaptable life. A group of humans passed close by. He observed them through a low-visibility field. One of them carried a device emitting radiation equal to small-scale plasma bursts. He called it a microwave. Another inhaled smoke from a burning plant, voluntarily. Children played barefoot on concrete surfaces warm enough to blister cerati skin. And they laughed. Zarzel began logging. Planetary report, Sol 3, referred to by natives as Earth. Initial observations contradict standard Deathworld definitions. Atmosphere and terrain appear deceptively benign. However, field-level bioscans indicate an environment fraught with immediate and long-term biological hazards. Estimate: 64% of flora and fauna contain weaponized traits. Climate unpredictability measured at extreme variance. Tectonic stability rated below threshold. Surface-level radiation fluctuates wildly depending on region. He paused to review the thermal map. Temperature differentials across planetary surface range from sub-zero to 50+ Celsius. Environmental protection among native species is minimal. Observed survival behaviors indicate extreme physiological resilience and adaptive psychology. Locals express minimal concern regarding hazards. He continued his walk, now heading toward a structure bearing large signage and symbols, unintelligible to him but marked as a place of communal gathering. He saw humans ingesting fermented liquids, engaging in loud conversation, gesturing with exaggerated movements. 2 of them began physical combat. No weapons, just fists. Others watched, laughing or cheering. When one participant bled, he was given a cloth and a carbonated beverage. He returned to his seat unbothered. Zarzel recalibrated his classification model. He looked back toward the forest, then at the city. One side was raw nature, teeth and venom and claw. The other was a metal and concrete labyrinth filled with synthetic toxins, fire-powered machines, and open flames. And humans stood at the center of it all, casually traversing both extremes like they were born immune to their environment's lethal intent. He understood now. It wasn't that Earth hid its nature. It never pretended to be safe. It was hostile in every dimension, from the microbial to the cosmic. The planet hurled hurricanes, quakes, floods, and droughts in rhythmic cycles. It bred disease at every level. It offered no protection, no second chances. And the species that emerged from that environment? They weren't merely survivors, they were forged by it. Zarzel initiated a direct query to the Galactic Registry. He bypassed the warning protocols. The information he uncovered chilled him more than the jungle's neurotoxins or the city's smog. Earth's classification as a Class 14 death world was not an error. It had been reviewed 12 times. It had been downgraded from Class 15, after a dispute about the parameters for intelligent habitation on apocalyptic-grade planets. The downgrade had only passed by 1 vote. He closed the interface. His hands trembled. For the first time in his professional life, Zarzel doubted the limits of his own species. The Cerati were advanced, yes. Peaceful, efficient, long-lived. But they had evolved in harmony. Their world nurtured them. Earth did not nurture. Earth challenged. And somehow, humans rose anyway. Zarxel returned to his vessel and initiated a secure uplink to the Galactic Science Archives. He needed clarification. The anomalies he'd encountered on Earth made no sense unless the classification was accurate. He bypassed standard clearance and requested full access to the planet's environmental dossier. The interface responded with a red pulse, stating that access required high-risk authorization. He confirmed and continued. The archive unfolded line by line. The first statement was blunt. Sol 3 exhibits life-hostile conditions exceeding standard survivability across all biological classes. Classification: Class 14 Death World. Verified. The subcategories began loading. Zarxel read in silence. Earth's gravitational force sits on the upper edge of tolerable ranges for most sapient species. Long-term exposure causes severe musculoskeletal deterioration in species not adapted to high-pressure environments. Several survey teams required full exosupport just to survive atmospheric descent. The atmosphere is oxygen-rich. While breathable, the elevated oxygen levels on Earth promote rapid combustion and oxidative stress in biological tissues. Free radicals produced by oxygen metabolism accelerate aging and organ decay. Oxygen toxicity is a threat even to native species under intense physical strain. For most species, breathing Earth's air for extended periods is comparable to slow internal corrosion. Earth's weak magnetic field and inconsistent ozone layer allow higher than normal levels of ultraviolet and cosmic radiation to reach the surface. Sun exposure is a constant, low-grade mutagenic hazard. Solar storms frequently disrupt technology and biological rhythms. In some regions, background radiation from naturally occurring materials exceeds the galactic safety threshold. Extremes in temperature are not only common, they're normal. Heatwaves, polar vortexes, sudden tornadoes, and supercell storms occur regularly. Earth cycles through unpredictable climate shifts, resulting in alternating floods, fires, droughts, and snowstorms across the same regions. No quadrant of the planet is stable year-round. The planet rests on a broken crust composed of massive tectonic plates. These plates shift with violent intensity, causing earthquakes, tsunamis, and volcanic eruptions. Some regions are considered high-risk zones where the ground itself can erupt with molten rock with minutes' notice. Despite this, native settlements persist directly on top of fault lines. 72% of Earth's biosphere is classified as biologically aggressive. Insects inject neurotoxins, reptiles possess anticoagulant venom, microorganisms adapt to antibiotics in real time. Even plant life is dangerous: spores, thorns, hallucinogens, toxins that target the nervous system. Earth is one of the only recorded worlds where even fresh water sources can carry lethal microbes. Zarxel blinked at the data. The classification wasn't speculative. It was deeply researched, confirmed, and revisited 12 times over the last few galactic cycles. Earth had maintained a Class 14 status longer than any other active biosphere. The original classification was Class 15, but a Galactic Ethics Council deemed that label incompatible with the observed presence of intelligent life, reducing it by a single point. The downgrade was symbolic, not scientific. He opened the species survival analysis. No known species from a death world above Class 10 had evolved into a civilization without external uplift. Earth was the singular outlier. Its native species not only survived the crucible, they evolved into dominant apex lifeforms through unassisted natural selection. Zarxel paused at a line that made no biological sense. Earth's dominant species lacks natural armor, venom, claws, or environmental camouflage. Their survival mechanism is cognition, social cooperation, and recursive tool development. No venom. No armor. No physical defenses. He continued. Humans possess extreme endurance. Unlike most species that sprint and rest, humans operate as persistence hunters, chasing prey over hours or days. Their bipedal structure and efficient cooling systems allow them to run in heat that disables most animals. Pain tolerance in humans is highly variable, with many capable of operating under broken bones, burns, or organ trauma. Their healing rates are not exceptional, but their behavioral tolerance for injury is abnormally high. Psychological factors were even more unusual. Humans have a high risk-reward threshold. They routinely engage in activities that defy survival instinct: climbing mountains, diving into oceans, flying machines into the sky. They weaponize curiosity. They explore places that kill them regularly. Zarxel reviewed a cultural archive titled Mount Everest. Hundreds of humans had died climbing this structure. They continued to climb it anyway. For pride. For meaning. Their cognitive structure includes a strange mix of logic and irrationality. They exhibit empathy and aggression in rapid shifts. They form deep social bonds, grieve lost connections, and yet willingly enter conflict with one another over abstract ideologies. Despite internal division, they collaborate on enormous scales, sharing ideas and building technologies that surpass their evolutionary baseline by centuries. Zarxel had studied advanced species before. Most developed technology slowly, through careful experimentation. Humanity's technological curve was different. Accelerated. Chaotic. In just a few thousand years, they progressed from primitive tools to spaceflight. Their growth was exponential, unpredictable, dangerous. He opened the final report tag, marked Galactic Risk Forecast. The document was brief. Humanity is not a stable species. They are volatile, emotional, brilliant, and relentless. Their homeworld shapes them not by safety, but by constant pressure. They do not seek peace by nature, but balance through struggle. If nurtured, they may become the galaxy's greatest allies. If threatened, they will become its most formidable enemy. Zarxel stared at that last sentence. He thought of the human who had walked past him earlier in the forest, singing, carrying a sharp metal tool, smiling at nothing. That human didn't know the world he lived on should have killed him at birth. He didn't act like a survivor. He acted like a conqueror. And yet Earth had not broken him. The planet had sharpened him. Zarxel began updating his personal classification logs. The science was settled, but the understanding was not. This was more than a death world. It was a forge. A planet that created life not through mercy, but through unrelenting trial. And somehow, humanity hadn't just survived it, they had mastered it. He saved the file under a new tag. Humanity, Anomaly of Evolution. He closed the archive. For the first time in his research career, Zarxel felt a mix of fear and respect that had no precedent. Earth had earned its classification. And humanity, born in fire, flood, poison, and radiation, had risen anyway. They were not a fluke. They were proof that even in the galaxy's harshest crucibles, something stronger could emerge. Zarxel accessed the cultural archives next. The science had stunned him, but now he needed context. How such a fragile species thrived amidst lethal odds. The database opened thousands of files related to human civilization, categorized by history, warfare, societal structure, innovation, and interspecies potential. He began with the earliest available records of human conflict. Primitive humans had no formal weapons, yet developed tools from stone, bone, and fire to dominate species physically superior to them. Spears, traps, coordinated ambushes. These weren't brute force tactics. They were intellectual solutions to natural disadvantages. They didn't wait for evolution to arm them. They used their environment against the environment itself. Across millennia, humans organized into tribes, then nations. Patterns emerged: cooperation followed by betrayal, peace followed by war, unity followed by collapse and resurgence. Their history was a cycle, not a straight line. But in every collapse, they rebuilt stronger. No setback remained permanent. No devastation kept them from trying again. Warfare evolved with them. Zarxel analyzed patterns. While most galactic species advanced toward harmony once reaching atomic capability, humans went the opposite direction. They built increasingly efficient systems for destruction. From steel blades to chemical weapons to intercontinental projectiles. Each leap in violence was paired with equal leaps in medicine, logistics, and communication. It was as if every step towards self-destruction taught them more about survival. Then came the peculiar part. Unlike other civilizations whose wars led to long-term stagnation, human conflicts often preceded surges in technological advancement. Their first digital networks emerged during geopolitical tensions. Medical triage protocols improved during global-scale wars. Even space exploration was first funded by competition, not curiosity. Their innovation thrived under pressure, often triggered by fear, pride, or necessity, not peace. Zarxel accessed linguistic patterns. Across thousands of cultures and dialects, he noticed humans had hundreds of words for hardship, perseverance, and resistance. Languages evolved around adversity. Suffering wasn't something they erased, it was something they absorbed, processed, and used as a foundation for identity. Entire belief systems formed around enduring suffering and transcending it. They created stories, philosophies, and art centered around the concept of rising despite overwhelming odds. In contrast to species that eradicated conflict for stability, humans seemed to manage conflict through adaptation. Not by avoiding danger, but by preparing for it. Resilience wasn't a value, it was a default setting. He pulled data on human adaptability. Within a single generation, humans could adjust to any biome: deserts, Arctic zones, jungles, even low oxygen altitudes. In hostile urban centers filled with pollution and noise, they didn't retreat. They built systems to survive: filters, tunnels, technology. Their instinct wasn't to flee the environment but to shape it. In low-resource zones, they rationed and innovated. In high-risk regions, they organized. Patterns of decentralized problem-solving emerged repeatedly. Even without central command, humans improvised under pressure. Cultural variance also puzzled him. In most advanced species, cultural divergence stabilized over time, converging into unified identity structures. Humans didn't consolidate. Instead, they diversified. Dozens of religions, languages, ideologies, and philosophies coexisted and conflicted. Yet this friction didn't dissolve them, it accelerated them. Tension bred invention. Opposition forced creativity. In fragmented societies, humans developed faster solutions than in unified ones. Zarxel examined artistic records. He expected leisure content. Instead, he found recurring themes of loss, struggle, and sacrifice. Their most celebrated literature and cinema portrayed characters overcoming adversity, often at great personal cost. Triumph wasn't the absence of pain, but the endurance of it. Their heroes were rarely perfect, they were scarred, damaged, driven by flaws. Humanity didn't aspire to perfection. They celebrated resilience. He switched to crisis response patterns. Natural disasters, pandemics, mass-scale accidents, humans consistently demonstrated a split response: panic and organization, chaos and unity. Their initial reaction might be fear or confusion, but quickly they adapted. Volunteers mobilized, information spread, strategies evolved in real time. Improvised protocols turned into global standards. He noted an especially large dataset from a disease outbreak where, despite political confusion, humanity developed new medicines, modified social behaviors, and reorganized economies within months. Zarxel pulled technological timelines. What stunned him was the exponential curve. From the discovery of electricity to the global digital network took mere centuries. From first flight to interplanetary probes, only decades. Technological singularity theorists predicted that human advancement would eventually escape linear comprehension. They weren't just progressing, they were accelerating toward an unknown endpoint. He studied their attitude toward mortality. Most species feared death. Humans did too, but many viewed it as a catalyst for meaning. They formed entire ethical systems around the idea of finite life. They pursued legacy, memory, continuation through offspring and ideas. This awareness of inevitable death did not cripple them, it motivated them. Some risked their lives to save strangers. Others sacrificed themselves for abstract causes. Death was not always a defeat in human context. Sometimes it was a message. Zarxel shifted to their space programs. Early missions were riddled with failure, budget constraints, and primitive technology. Yet they continued. Even after catastrophic losses, they launched again. The goal was not immediate conquest of space, it was understanding. Exploration. Not all missions had a defined payoff, but they persisted. Not because it was efficient, but because it was possible. Even their humor defied logic. In crisis, they joked. In pain, they found absurdity. Laughter emerged in funeral rituals, battlefields, hospitals. This wasn't denial, it was a coping mechanism. A form of resistance through levity. No other species exhibited such consistent emotional inversion. Their minds found balance not by suppressing pain, but by reframing it. He opened psychological warfare reports. Humans proved uniquely resistant to intimidation tactics. Threats often provoked aggression rather than submission. Isolation sometimes increased mental resilience rather than breaking it. Attempts at controlling human behavior through fear frequently backfired, leading to unpredictable retaliation. They couldn't always be controlled, but they could be inspired. Finally, he reviewed their definition of victory. It wasn't always domination. Sometimes, victory meant enduring longer. Holding the line. Rebuilding what was broken. Refusing to give up even when success seemed mathematically impossible. For humanity, victory wasn't a moment. It was a process. A refusal to yield. Zarxel closed the archives and remained silent. What he had witnessed was not evolution through comfort or stability. It was survival through continuous trial. Humanity did not thrive despite hardship, they thrived because of it. Conflict, failure, and loss were not barriers to growth. They were catalysts. Earth had not just produced a sentient species, it had forged a tenacious one. Not through mercy, but through constant adversity. And humans had learned not only to survive, but to rise. Always forward. Always reaching. Always adapting. In a universe that often feared chaos, humanity had learned to dance with it. Zarxel submitted a formal request to observe human institutions firsthand, focusing on science, governance, and education. His aim was to understand how a species from such a lethal planet had developed cohesion, strategy, and progress despite its inherent volatility. Access was granted to open-source materials, broadcasts, and global records detailing humanity's collective systems. He began with education. Unlike most advanced species that adopted centralized knowledge repositories accessible from birth, humans relied on prolonged formal instruction. Children, entirely dependent for years, spent decades absorbing foundational information. This extended vulnerability period was biologically inefficient but intellectually powerful. It allowed for massive cognitive shaping. Human systems taught not only facts but interpretation, critical thought, problem-solving, and debate. Disagreement was not discouraged. In many systems, it was institutionalized. Curricula included paradoxes, dilemmas, and scenarios with no clear answers. Humans trained their young to challenge assumptions, examine evidence, and reject dogma. Their minds weren't shaped to accept, only to question. This built not only knowledge, but a culture of intellectual friction. Innovation followed. Zarxel reviewed their scientific method. Every advancement began with a premise they expected to be wrong. They treated truth not as fixed, but as a moving target. Proof wasn't absolute, it was iterative. Hypotheses, experiments, peer review. Even when consensus formed, it remained open to revision. Their greatest leaps emerged when someone defied the prevailing model. Their process rewarded disruption. Their institutions often disagreed internally. Competing labs, universities, and think tanks argued openly, even in front of global audiences. No centralized knowledge monopoly existed. This decentralization made them less efficient, but vastly more adaptable. If one node failed, others continued. Truth survived through distributed contradiction. He turned to governance structures. No single format prevailed. Monarchies, democracies, autocracies, republics, tribal councils, military juntas, all existed, often simultaneously. What shocked him was that humans considered this normal. They didn't agree on what the ideal system should be. Instead, they treated governance as fluid, changing, evolving, sometimes regressing. Failures were frequent, but so were corrections. Revolutions, elections, reforms. Their political world was not static. It was in motion, always. Even democratic models were complex. Representation systems varied. Some used popular vote, others proportional distribution. Human institutions adapted with time and crises. During global upheavals, new laws emerged within months. In slower periods, reforms took decades. Patience and urgency coexisted, depending on cultural momentum. Accountability mechanisms fascinated him. Investigative journalism, watchdog groups, whistleblowers. Humans built systems to monitor their own systems. No authority was absolute. Power was challenged, criticized, scrutinized. Leaks, protests, and public discourse created constant tension. While this created instability, it also acted as a safeguard. Corruption wasn't eliminated, it was contested. Scandals triggered restructuring, not just outrage. Injustice existed in abundance. Yet so did correction. Historical atrocities were documented and taught in schools. Memorials, anniversaries, documentaries, they didn't hide their failures. They exposed them, analyzed them, apologized for them, debated them publicly. This didn't erase the pain. But it created a historical consciousness unlike any species Zarxel had studied. Remembrance wasn't symbolic. It was educational. He moved to technological governance. Digital infrastructure connected billions of humans through a chaotic, barely regulated network. Misinformation spread easily, but so did knowledge. Online platforms enabled revolutions, education, mass mobilization. Despite the dangers, humanity had not restricted access. The same tools used for conflict were also used for connection. This duality was never resolved. They embraced both sides. He reviewed economic models. No unified theory existed. Capitalism, socialism, hybrid systems, all functioned simultaneously, often within the same nation. Trade was global but unequal. Yet adaptation occurred. Crises spurred new systems. Entire industries had risen from resource scarcity, shifting from physical to digital, fossil to renewable, mass to personalized. Resource distribution was flawed, yet constantly reevaluated. What caught his attention was entrepreneurship. Human individuals routinely took personal risks to launch new systems, products, or ideas. Failure was common. But culturally, failure was not stigmatized. It was often praised as experience. People who lost fortunes often returned to try again. Resilience was rewarded not only in survival but in ambition. Philanthropy emerged as a cultural anomaly. Humans voluntarily gave away wealth, resources, and time, sometimes anonymously, sometimes strategically. This wasn't universal, but it existed across all cultures. Charity, mutual aid, emergency relief. Not regulated, not enforced, but widespread. Compassion existed alongside greed, often in the same individuals. Moral contradictions were not viewed as hypocrisy. They were accepted as part of human identity. He reviewed crisis governance. During pandemics, governments reorganized. Supply chains rerouted. Citizens complied with new restrictions, protested them, then adjusted. In climate disasters, they rebuilt. In war zones, civilians created parallel aid systems. Leadership often failed, yet populations continued functioning, innovating in spite of it. Redundancy wasn't built into systems, it was embedded in the population. Legal structures evolved constantly. New rights, laws, protections emerged in response to changing values. Free speech, privacy, labor, identity, all contested, defined, and redefined. Law was not permanent, it was negotiated. Interpretation changed with context. Human law was not a wall, it was a mirror, reflecting the civilization's current state. Civic participation varied. Voter turnout, protests, activism fluctuated by region and era. Yet even in apathy, something peculiar occurred. When apathy reached critical mass, something sparked, an event, injustice, movement, and mass mobilization returned. Political dormancy was never final. It was cyclical. Lulls often preceded major shifts. He examined diplomacy. Despite a long history of conflict, humans maintained embassies, treaties, and alliances. They balanced competition with cooperation. Even rival nations traded, collaborated in science, and prevented mutual destruction through fragile agreements. Trust wasn't assumed. It was constructed, broken, and rebuilt repeatedly. Language within policy was revealing. Terms like transparency, inclusion, sustainability, and accountability appeared frequently. These were aspirations, not realities. Yet their existence in official documents indicated a directional intent. Humans governed toward ideals they often failed to meet, but still pursued. They were aware of their flaws. And they wrote systems that tried to correct them. Zarksel studied intergenerational planning. Unlike short-lived species, humans passed down records, legacies, even burdens. They built institutions to last beyond individual lifetimes. Universities, courts, research labs. These outlived their founders, continuing missions without originators. Intent survived death. He found models of interspecies theory in academic circles. Despite no contact with extraterrestrials at the time, humans had already theorized galactic ethics, diplomacy, even xenolinguistics. They assumed other life existed. And rather than fearing it, many sought dialogue. Their fiction had already explored scenarios of peace, war, misunderstanding, and alliance. Imagination predated reality. Preparation existed for the unknown. He noted how humans handled paradox. Most species eliminated contradiction through logic refinement. Humans tolerated ambiguity. They held opposing beliefs simultaneously, operated in uncertainty, and made decisions with incomplete data. They didn't require perfect alignment to function. They acted anyway. This cognitive flexibility was embedded in their institutions. Democracy tolerated dissent. Science accepted doubt. Law adapted. Economics shifted. All operated under tension, contradiction, and change. This wasn't a flaw. It was structural. Zarxel concluded his review. Human systems were not perfect. They were inconsistent, flawed, often inefficient. But they were alive. Dynamic. Capable of course correction. Built not for comfort, but for survival and growth under pressure. Their governance was not about control. It was about direction through chaos. They did not seek to end disorder. They learned to operate within it. Earth's sentient species did not build a utopia. They built mechanisms to keep trying. Zarxel finalized his report for the Galactic Council. Data streams, cultural matrices, biological assessments, and behavioral simulations had all been compiled. The classification of Earth as a Class 14 death world was no longer in question. It wasn't a bureaucratic exaggeration, it was a conservative estimate. What disturbed him now wasn't the planet's hostility, but the nature of the species it had forged. The conclusion demanded confrontation, not academic reflection. He initiated direct simulation testing against theoretical invasion scenarios. Standard models of suppression, environmental collapse, psychological subversion, and civil destabilization were applied to Earth. In 73% of simulations, humans adapted faster than the aggressors. In 21%, they not only survived but turned the assault into a technological or tactical advantage. Only in 6% did full-scale suppression work, and only when the invaders completely annihilated all infrastructure in the first wave. Any delay longer than 48 hours gave humans time to organize resistance cells, hijack enemy tech, or sabotage supply lines. Zarxel recalibrated the model using more subtle strategies: manipulation, soft infiltration, resource bribery. Success rates remained low. Human networks proved too fragmented for centralized influence, yet too interconnected to collapse in isolation. Cultural and political diversity, long seen as a flaw by other species, created unpredictable but effective resistances. There was no single point of failure. Humans didn't all react the same, but they all reacted. Further analysis revealed a dangerous strategic quality. When humans perceived existential threat, internal divisions dissolved with alarming speed. Groups that were previously antagonistic united against a common enemy. Ideological conflicts were set aside when survival was at stake. Zarxel found historical records of former enemies combining forces during crises. Invasion, catastrophe, or oppression triggered mass-scale cooperation, not surrender. Desperation activated ingenuity. He examined humanity's concept of warfare beyond weapons. Psychological manipulation, information dominance, mimetic tactics. Humans excelled in non-physical arenas. Their ability to weaponize symbols, language, and belief systems made them tactically superior in cultural subversion. Narratives were as powerful as explosives. Hope could destabilize an occupation. A single act of defiance could spread rebellion across continents. Their strength did not come from uniformity, but from autonomy. Individuals acted without central command yet aligned instinctively in defense of a shared principle. Martyrdom, sacrifice, symbolic resistance, these were not abstract ideals. They were historical constants. And when one human fell, others didn't scatter, they rallied. Death wasn't deterrent. Sometimes it was recruitment. Zarxel investigated their deterrent capability. Despite being a relatively young interstellar species, humans had rapidly acquired technologies that outpaced civilizations thousands of years older. This wasn't due to superior intellect, but unrelenting experimentation. Where others feared risk, humans chased it. Trial and error wasn't shameful. It was expected. Dangerous innovation wasn't discouraged, it was normalized. He studied covert experimentation logs. Multiple governments had pushed boundaries in genetic modification, artificial intelligence, planetary engineering, all with limited consensus. Ethics debates raged, but exploration continued. Even failures were integrated into future attempts. If one path failed, another was carved. They didn't retreat from danger, they mapped it. No single threat defined them. They had prepared for biological extinction, climate collapse, rogue AI, nuclear devastation. Not through central planning, but distributed initiative. Private citizens, isolated labs, decentralized groups, all worked on survival strategies. Earth's species didn't rely on institutions alone. Resilience was encoded into the population. Zarxel accessed human theoretical forums, public discussions among non-specialists. What stunned him was the intellectual agility among ordinary individuals. Philosophy, physics, existential risk management, topics usually restricted to elite circles and other species, were debated in digital commons. This intellectual democratization was a force multiplier. Any idea could emerge from anywhere. The boundaries between thinker and doer were blurred. He reviewed predictive models. While most civilizations feared technological singularity, humans anticipated it. They didn't just theorize collapse, they gamed it. Post-apocalyptic planning, artificial intelligence containment scenarios, planetary migration schemes. Worst-case thinking was a cultural feature. They expected disasters, and prepared stories, protocols, and prototypes in advance. When the worst arrived, they weren't shocked. They were ready. Even more concerning was their capacity to imitate and improve. In interspecies engagements, humans were not only curious, they were analytical. They disassembled, reverse-engineered, adapted. Captured technology was never left untouched. What was alien became familiar, then obsolete. No tool remained foreign for long. No advantage remained exclusive. Zarxel evaluated humanity's long-term survival indicators. Despite ecological damage and repeated self-inflicted crises, population stabilization had begun. Restoration technologies were emerging. Global communication allowed rapid coordination. Disease mitigation, disaster response, even food synthesis. Resilience wasn't theoretical. It was active. Ongoing. He examined human explorers who volunteered for missions with no guarantee of return. Individuals who knowingly stepped into lethal environments for the purpose of discovery. This wasn't programming, it was cultural. The frontier wasn't feared. It was revered. Risk wasn't avoided. It was pursued. Not as thrill-seeking, but as purpose. The final portion of his report focused on what he labeled motivational elasticity, the ability of humans to function under duress not only effectively but inspired. Most species deteriorated in the face of prolonged hardship. Humans transformed. Suffering became narrative. Narrative became fuel. They didn't merely cope, they transcended. Loss created art. Scarcity bred innovation. Pain generated meaning. Where others collapsed, humans created. The more pressure applied, the more potent they became. Their limits were temporary. Their response to defeat wasn't submission, it was escalation. Zarxel ended his transmission with a recommendation: Earth must not be engaged with hostile intent. Not because of diplomacy. Not because of empathy. But because the consequences of misjudging humanity would be catastrophic, for the aggressor. The most dangerous weapon Earth possessed was not a machine, a virus, or a bomb. It was human nature. To underestimate humans was to invite failure. Not because they were superior, but because they refused to stay defeated. They would study you, understand you, adapt to you, and eventually, become a version of you that you could no longer overcome. Their chaos wasn't a weakness. It was armor. Their emotions weren't distractions. They were signals. Their contradictions weren't flaws. They were evolution in motion. Earth was not merely a Class 14 death world because of its storms, beasts, or toxins. It was because it had produced a species that turned adversity into strategy, pain into momentum, and fear into fire. Humanity did not conquer their world by dominating it. They endured it. And in doing so, became the one force the galaxy had not accounted for, intelligent chaos with purpose. Zarxel sent the final report with a closing note. Approach Earth not as conquerors. Approach them as students, or not at all.